Imagine staying up until like 4 in the morning, wrestling with broken code, getting a measly 5 hours of just highly fragmented sleep, and then logging that in your journal as a perfectly healthy, successful week.
Yeah, I mean, most of us would look at that sleep data and assume an absolute total lifestyle collapse.
Right. But today, we're looking at a personal journal from April 2026 that completely flips how we think about the relationship between, health and obsession.
It really does.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a magnifying glass to a weekly review written by a creator in Ang, and it offers this masterful look under the hood of a very specific kind of life.
It's essentially a real-time audit of how human behavior actually works under pressure, because we talk about personal systems as these pristine blueprints, right?
Absolutely. Like the perfect morning routine.
Right, you build the perfect routine, you drink your water, life stays calm. But this journal entry drops us into the messy reality of what happens when a tightly wound, highly disciplined system gets stress tested by a sudden wave of creative obsession.
Okay, let's unpack this because Ang's core philosophy is laid out right at the start, and it really sets the stakes for everything that follows.
It does.
Ang believes that a proactive focus on health isn't just about, avoiding a cold or trying to look good. It is the crucial, non-negotiable foundation required to achieve any personal or professional goals.
The wellness routine is basically a shock absorber.
Yes, exactly. But as you said, the system gets tested.
And the ultimate disruptor during this particular week in April wasn't a major life crisis. It was environmental.
Just the weather.
Just the weather. A heavy seasonal downpour kept Ang completely stuck indoors, particularly over the weekend. And that simple geographical constraint, just being trapped in the house, became the catalyst for a massive shift in behavior.
Because being trapped inside triggered an absolute deep dive into Ang's pet coding projects.
Yeah.
We are talking about programming in a language called Haskell.
Oh.
And anyone who has ever had a hyperfixation knows this feeling. You're stuck inside, you open up a project you've been meaning to tinker with, and suddenly you fall entirely down the rabbit hole.
You really do.
Ang was up until the early hours of the morning, night after night, just writing code.
Which, as we know, immediately impacts the most vulnerable pillar of any wellness foundation. I mean, the sleep architecture.
The sleep data in this journal is wild. I mean, Ang is generally aiming for a healthy 6, 7, or 8 hours, but the raw data for this week shows an average of exactly 6.4 hours per day.
Which doesn't sound terrible on its own.
No, it doesn't until you look at the fragmentation. This wasn't a steady, reliable 6.4 hours. It swung like a pendulum.
Right.
Some nights Ang is only getting like 5 or 6 hours, and then there's a massive 9-hour recovery crash on a completely different day.
And that boom and bust cycle of rest is a classic symptom of flow state disruption. The brain becomes so engaged with the problem-solving task that it just starts overriding the body's natural circadian signals.
I call it the casino effect of deep work.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the dopamine loop mimics a slot machine. You fix one bug, 2 more pop up, but you feel so close to the solution that you keep pulling the lever.
Right, time just vanishes.
Time completely disappears. You lose track of your physical body. The outside world ceases to exist, and suddenly the sun is coming up. So what does this all mean for a body that is actively trying to maintain a strict health baseline?
That's the real question.
How does someone survive a 4 a.m. coding binge without their physical engine just seizing up?
What's fascinating here is the sheer lack of guilt in Ang's reflection. There is no panic over the lost sleep.
Not at all.
There is no self-flagellation about ruining the perfect routine. Instead, Ang treats the body like a complex machine that has temporarily been pushed past its red line. It requires immediate, conservative maintenance.
Yeah.
To counteract the physical toll of sitting in a chair until 4 in the morning, Ang deploys a highly deliberate wind-down ritual before sleep, utilizing a heat pad treatment and regular massaging.
I was actually looking at that specific protocol. It isn't just about feeling cozy. Applying localized heat actually triggers vasodilation, right?
Yes, exactly.
It opens up the blood vessels, which signals the parasympathetic nervous system to take over. It's basically forcing the body to downshift from that high-alert coding state into a recovery state.
Precisely. It is manually overriding the nervous system, and Ang pairs that external thermal regulation with internal maintenance, specifically by massively increasing fluid intake using green tea.
Ang notes that adequate hydration helps regulate body temperature, explicitly mentioning that they didn't experience any feverish feeling over the week despite the severe lack of sleep.
Right.
And I know that feeling so intimately. When you're severely overtired, your skin actually feels hot, your joints ache, and your eyes burn.
That feverish sensation is a literal, mild, inflammatory response. When you deprive the body of sleep, it experiences physiological stress and releases inflammatory cytokines. By continuously flushing the system with green tea, Ang is actively combating that. Green tea is packed with antioxidants, specifically catechins, which help neutralize that inflammatory cascade. It is an incredibly pragmatic, biological defense strategy.
And that pragmatism completely dictates how Ang handles physical activity while trapped inside. Which brings us to the microhabits and how a rigid wellness system adapts to heavy constraints.
Right, the step counts.
Yes, Ang meticulously tracks step counts. The stated goal was somewhere between 4,500 to 8,000 steps. But the reality of being trapped indoors,
It drops.
the daily average was exactly 4,293 steps.
And falling short of a target often breaks a habit loop for people. They figure, if I can't hit my 10,000 steps, I might as well stay on the couch.
But Ang pulls a crucial insight from this deficit. Ang realizes that even on a low-activity, trapped indoors kind of day, you have to hit a strict baseline.
Baseline is key.
Right. Ang sets that floor at 3,000 steps. Not to get fit, not to build endurance, but just to keep what they call metabolic momentum consistent.
The concept of metabolic momentum is incredibly astute. The human body is an engine that takes a tremendous amount of energy to cold start.
Oh, for sure.
When you drop your daily movement to zero, which is really easy to do when it's raining and you're coding, you start inducing acute muscle insulin resistance. Your lymphatic system, which relies on movement to pump fluid, just stagnates.
Ugh. Yeah, you feel it the next day.
Exactly. Getting the engine going the next day feels physically terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But by forcing a minimum of 3,000 steps, Ang is maintaining just enough circulation and metabolic activity to keep the engine idling.
I love the logic there, but
Yep.
I am going to push back on Ang's definition of strength training during this week.
Oh, why is that?
Because Ang writes that the primary strength recovery training consisted of weeding.
The gardening.
Specifically, prolonged squatting while tendering to gardening chores on the few brief hours it wasn't raining. You have to admit, calling pulling weeds a strength workout feels like a massive stretch.
I wouldn't say that.
Come on, you aren't getting progressive overload from a dandelion. How does that prevent muscle atrophy?
Well, if we connect this to the broader mechanics of human movement, it is absolutely a form of strength training, specifically through time under tension.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about the physical demand of a prolonged, deep Asian squat. You are holding a massive isometric contraction. You are engaging your glutes, your quads, and your stabilizing core muscles for extended periods, all while performing fine motor tasks with your hands and constantly shifting your center of gravity.
I hear the biomechanics argument, but is it inducing actual muscular failure or is it just uncomfortable?
We know it pushed the muscles to their limit because Ang actually documents the fallout.
Oh, right.
The journal notes experiencing actual relapses of knee pain and muscle spasms specifically from those gardening chores. The deep squatting literally stressed the surrounding musculature to the point of spasm.
Which feeds right back into the maintenance routine we just talked about, right? The massaging and the heat pads subduing the knee symptoms. It is a constant, deliberate loop of applying stress and then aggressively managing the recovery. And we also see this loop playing out in the diet and weight tracking.
Yeah, the weight tracking is fascinating.
Ang notes that overall daily weight decreased slightly over the week, going from 69.36 kilograms down to 69.18 kilograms.
Which is a drop of 0.18 kilograms. And Ang correctly diagnoses that this is not fat loss.
No, of course not. Burning fat while sitting at a computer for 10 hours a day on fragmented sleep pretty much defies the laws of thermodynamics.
It does. When you look at the biological mechanisms at play, that minor weight fluctuation is entirely about fluid shifts.
Okay, how so?
When your sleep is as sporadic as Ang's was, your cortisol levels, your primary stress hormones, become elevated and erratic. Cortisol dramatically impacts antidiuretic hormones, changing how your body retains or sheds water.
Oh, wow.
So the slight drop in weight is simply the body constantly readjusting its water retention in response to the sleep stress and, of course, the massive influx of green tea.
And to fuel that stress system, Ang maintains a very specific 1-to-2 macro ratio.
Right, the 1-to-2.
That is 1 part plants, 2 parts protein, 2 parts carbohydrates. We're talking a diet of regular oatmeal, soft-boiled eggs, salads, and miso noodle soup with vegetables.
It's very structured.
Very. The heavy carb load replenishes the massive amount of glucose the brain burns during deep focus coding, while the high protein repairs the muscular strain from those intense isometric weeding sessions.
Makes perfect sense.
But amidst this structured diet, there's a detail I found absolutely fascinating. Aang accidentally fell into a 5-2 intermittent fasting routine.
A completely unintentional fast.
Unintentional, but perfectly logical when you look at the biological domino effect of the week. 2 days out of the week, Aang just ended up fasting.
Right.
Why? It all tracks back to the late-night Haskell coding. To fuel the flow state and stay awake, Aang was drinking green tea.
Which does more than just hydrate you.
Exactly. Green tea isn't just flavored water. The catechins and caffeine in the tea actively influence hormones like ghrelin, which signals hunger to the brain. The tea literally suppressed Aang's appetite.
Wow.
The fuel for the mind ended up muting the hunger signals of the body.
It perfectly illustrates how interconnected our choices are. The environmental constraint of the rain triggers the isolation triggers the coding obsession.
Yeah.
The coding requires the tea induces the fasting. You simply cannot separate the mind's behavior from the body's chemistry.
And to manage that chaotic intersection of mind and body, Aang relies on some serious mental grounding.
The meditation.
Yeah, you would assume someone this deeply analytical, tracking steps to the single digit and monitoring weight to the decimal would have a rigid hour-long meditation practice.
You'd think so.
But the mindfulness routine is remarkably brief. It consists of 1 to 3 minutes of sitting meditation after meals. That's it, along with some walking meditations while doing physical chores like raking leaves.
It is the absolute definition of practical mindfulness. For a mind that is prone to obsessive flow states, trying to force an hour of blank slate meditation can often induce more anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense.
By microdosing the mindfulness, taking just 60 seconds after eating a soft-boiled egg to just exist, or focusing entirely on the tactile sensation of raking leaves, Aang is simply lowering the neurological temperature.
Oh, I like that phrasing.
It cools the system just enough to keep the cognitive engine from overheating without demanding a massive time investment.
Which brings us to the most important philosophical question of this entire journal entry.
The big why.
Yes, the why. Having seen how meticulously Aang maintains this physical machine, enforcing the 3,000-step baseline, applying the heat pads, managing the hydration, doing the micro-meditations, we have to ask, what is the actual point?
Right.
Why endure knee pain from squatting and feverish symptoms from fragmented sleep just to work on a pet project? What is fueling this mind?
To understand the motivation, we have to contextualize the landscape of technology that Aang is navigating in April 2026.
Aang gives us a very vivid picture of what the software development world looks like at this specific moment.
It's a very different landscape.
It really is. Aang mentions hopping through GitHub, which is the massive online hub where developers collaborate and share code, and observing that the platform is flooded with a sea of AI and LLM-generated repositories.
Right. Large language models have reached a point where they are just churning out entire code bases. They are creating an ocean of instant, automated, frictionless software projects.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How does Aang react to this technological marvel?
By ignoring it.
By almost entirely ignoring it. Aang submits a few trivial typo fixes to some AI-generated projects, but otherwise completely turns away from that sea of instant gratification to obsessively tinker with a personal project built in Haskell.
Which is a crucial detail. Haskell is a purely functional programming language.
It's not easy.
It is notoriously unforgiving and complex because it forces the programmer to think in strict mathematical terms. It does not allow for sloppy logic. It is the exact opposite of asking an AI to just spit out a functioning script.
And Aang's project is deep in the weeds. The core structure of the program is done, but Aang writes that it requires heavy tweaking and refactoring because the initial assumptions didn't match real-world edge cases.
So Aang is doing it the hard way.
Exactly. So Aang is manually fighting with broken, complex code. Think about the irony for you, the listener, right now. In a world that is literally drowning in instant, effortless AI-generated solutions, Aang is actively choosing to manually wrestle with frustrating, mind-bending edge cases late into the night.
This raises an important question about the intrinsic value of human hobbies and really human work in general.
Yeah.
In an era where a machine can give you the final output instantly, what is the value of the process? If the AI can build the bridge, why learn engineering?
Aang gives us the answer directly. Amidst all this frustrating refactoring and lack of sleep, Aang writes, "I'm having a total blast with it."
I love that line.
Right. Aang notes that this deep, indulgent problem-solving is exactly what programming has always been about. It is an outlet for personal growth. It's a form of self-expression. The goal isn't just to get an output. The goal is the joy of the struggle.
It acts as cognitive resistance training. Just like the prolonged squatting in the garden stresses the physical muscles to keep them functional, wrestling with Haskell edge cases stresses the neural pathways to keep the mind sharp.
That's a brilliant comparison.
In a frictionless world, the friction itself becomes the reward. The difficulty isn't an obstacle to the hobby, the difficulty is the actual point.
And Aang's mind is constantly seeking out varied forms of this friction. The sheer scale of curiosity documented in this 1 week is staggering.
It really is.
It is an entire ecosystem of cognitive load. We have a list of other ongoing projects that show a brain-demanding constant stimulation. Aang is writing 3 posts a day. 3 a day,
Wow.
covering wildly different disciplines, from Ubuntu GNOME software usage to the intricacies of fish keeping.
And the fish keeping isn't passive either. Aang is actively priming pairs of Apistogramma cichlid fish on a specifically built yellow-blue rack, which requires a deep understanding of water chemistry and biological triggers.
Exactly, it's applied science.
Yeah.
Add to that physical and digital daily decluttering. There's pending grout work on a balcony tile, which is literal manual labor.
Yes.
And there's even a stalled book project about the 3 highs, which explores controlling high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and high cholesterol.
When you look at that list, it isn't just a random collection of chores, it is cross-training for the brain. Writing, biology, manual labor, medical research, and advanced computer science.
It is exhausting just reading the list, but
Yeah.
let's synthesize this because this brings us full circle to the core mission of our deep dive today. When you look at the sheer weight of Aang's intellectual pursuits, it completely flips how we usually think about physical discipline. We often view strict wellness routines, like forcing yourself to walk 3,000 steps when you don't want to, or strictly eating 2 parts protein to 1 part plant, or sitting in silence for 60 seconds as inherently restrictive.
Right, like a chore.
We think of health habits as a cage that limits our freedom.
But for a highly driven, obsessively curious person, those routines aren't a cage. They are the scaffolding that supports the mind. They are a safety net.
Yes, they exist precisely so that when you inevitably stumble into a passionate flow state, when the rain traps you inside, you stay up until 4 in the morning fighting with Haskell code because you are having a total blast, your body doesn't completely break down.
Exactly.
The stoic, boring physical routine ensures your biological vessel survives your own obsessive passion.
It is the ultimate balance. The rigid maintenance of the body buys you the freedom to safely indulge in the chaos of the mind.
It is a brilliant way to approach life. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Aang's 2026 journal, I want to leave you with a final thought to pull on.
Okay, let's hear it.
We just saw how Aang found immense, genuine purpose in the difficult manual struggle of refactoring complex code, actively turning away from the sea of easy AI-generated shortcuts on GitHub.
Which leaves us with a critical paradox to consider for our own lives. We are surrounded by modern tools, automation, smart devices, generative algorithms that are relentlessly designed to remove friction from our days.
Right?
But if friction, deep problem solving, and the manual struggle are exactly what give us a sense of purpose and keep our cognitive engines running, should you be intentionally designing more difficult struggles into your own hobbies?
Wow. Yeah.
To keep your mind engaged, do you need to start actively ignoring the shortcut?
That is a fascinating question to chew on. Sometimes taking the hardest possible path is the only way that actually feels good. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you are coding in functional languages, studying water chemistry, or just trying to keep your metabolic momentum from crashing on a rainy day, we encourage you to find your own baseline. Go pull some weeds, build your physical safety net, and embrace the absolute joy of your own complicated, messy projects. Until next time.